heck is something called GPO and WEP or WEP? Well, here to talk with me about that is Dana Anspaugh from Sensible Money. Dana, welcome.
Hi, Bob. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. A lot of folks are familiar with their Social Security benefits, but are sometimes taken aback when they learn about things called the government pension offset or the windfall elimination provision. And we're happy to have you walk us through these things.
Yeah, they're complicated aspects of the Social Security system. And it's not only, consumers out there that can get caught off guard by it, but financial planners can too. And so we have to do a lot of extra work to make sure that, did we account for this? So let's talk about what it is. Many people will work for a government or state municipality. Perhaps they're a teacher, a firefighter, a police officer, as examples, where they are going to be covered by a pension. And while they worked, they did not pay into Social Security. And so these provisions of Social Security were put in place to prevent what they call double dipping, right? Where you could maybe work 10 years and pay into Social Security and then not pay into Social Security for 20 years and collect your full Social Security benefits and your full pension benefits. So to prevent this, they put these rules in place. And they're two distinct rules. The windfall elimination provision impacts you if you had less than 30 years of what are called substantial earnings. As of 2023, a substantial earnings amount is 29,700. So it's indexed to inflation. If you had less than 30 years of substantial earnings paying into the Social Security system, then the formula that calculates your Social Security benefit will be different than the traditional formula. And that reduction that's going to apply isn't going to show up on your Social Security statement. So you might get your statement. It would show your full benefit amount. You think that's what you're going to get. You go to file. You realize you're subject to this windfall elimination provision. And whoa, big eye opener. You go, oh, I'm not going to have all that monthly income. So that can be a big rude awakening. The other aspect, the government pension offset, again, it impacts you if you have a pension, right? You worked and have a pension and for where you did not pay into Social Security to acquire that pension. And now it's going to impact the survivor or spousal benefits you may get on a spouse's record. And so we've encountered that where, we had a couple, they were both in Kentucky. They both worked in the school system. They weren't, I don't believe, teachers, if I'm going by memory, but they might have been in administration. And so we didn't realize initially that we thought she would be able to get the spousal benefit on his earnings record. And in fact, she was going to have a pension of nearly $3,000 a month. And so instead of getting the spousal benefit, it was going to reduce her Social Security benefits by $2,000 a month. Basically, it took away all of the spousal benefit that she would have gotten. So again, there's some digging because it doesn't show up on the Social Security statement, some extra questions you have to ask. If you use software, which we do to calculate the Social Security benefits, you still have to ask the right questions to know what to put into the software so it will calculate these kinds of reductions when you're doing an analysis.
For folks who think they are unaware that they may be subject to the windfall elimination provision, if they look at their earnings history, are there some telltale signs about whether they're affected by this?
Sometimes. So when you look at your Social Security statement, you're going to see a column that shows earnings tax for Social Security. And then you're going to see a column that shows like earnings tax for Medicare. And sometimes when we pull the Social Security statement, and you can Google, sample Social Security statement and find a sample one, but you should create your own My Social Security account and log in and look at your own. And you will see these two columns of earnings. And if you see zeros in the columns that say earnings tax for Social Security, and yet you worked during those years, that would be a good sign right there that you may be subject to this windfall elimination provision or government pension offset if you're married.
So there's a lot of folks are taken by surprise when they learn about them being subject to WEP, but according to the stats on the Social Security website, it's it's only 3% of all beneficiaries, or almost nearly 2 million beneficiaries out of the 65 million total beneficiaries that are affected by WEP. So on the one hand, it's not a big problem, but it is a big problem if you're subject to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. 3% sounds pretty small, right? And yet, I think about it in terms of the number of clients we serve, and sounds about right. Probably 1 to 3 times a year, we might encounter someone that's subject to one of these provisions where we have to do some additional digging to do a more accurate projection of what their income will be.
Well, so speaking of accurate projections, someone might be planning for retirement. They're looking at their sources of income. They say they have a pension. They think they have this Social Security benefit, and it's sort of what happens when you sort of learn that you might be subject to WEP.
Well, you are going to have to do some additional calculations, right, to actually figure out, well, what will my Social Security benefits be? And if you had been planning to retire relatively soon and expecting to get both your full pension and full Social Security, obviously there might be some re-budgeting, rejiggering you need to do to figure out the household finances. So it's, of course, much better if you understand that if this is going to apply to you earlier on. Now, I believe there's 15 states where teachers do not pay into Social Security system. My mom, for an example, is one of them. She's in Missouri, and she gets a pension, but she gets almost no Social Security because she worked so many years in the Missouri teacher system and didn't pay into Social Security. Some other states, there's Illinois, Colorado, Massachusetts, and I think you're going to put the full list in the notes below this video. And then there's up to, I believe it's 12 states where state and municipal workers may or may not be participating in Social Security. There's 5, my understanding, is where you would not participate in Social Security. That's Alaska, Colorado, Massachusetts, Nevada, and Ohio. And then there's 7 others where it might depend on where you live in the state. So it's optional. It might be that you could opt in to Social Security if you wanted to. So your benefits program, you should be able to ask if you are a teacher or if you are a government or state worker, firefighter, police officer, you want to ask. And then when you get your Social Security statement, you want to realize that what's showing up on that statement may not be what you will actually get, because the reduction isn't calculated into that statement benefit that's showing up for you.
So I think, let me go back to GPO. To me, it almost seems like this is an even more disturbing sort of event for surviving spouses and widows, in part because they can't look at their own Social Security statement to determine whether they may be subject to GPO or not. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say, although they would know if they have a pension from work not covered by Social Security, right? They are likely subject to WEP in that case, which means that would also impact any survivor or spousal benefit that they would get on a spouse's record. Now, I have an interesting situation. A woman we'll call Ida. She and her husband had immigrated from Germany when they were young and had worked here in the U.S. their whole life, but her husband still had a pension from Germany. He passed, unfortunately, 2 years into retirement, and she started getting this survivor benefit. Well, when she filled out, there's a questionnaire when she applied for her own Social Security, she answered the question, do you receive a pension from, work not covered by Social Security, as yes. But the answer was actually no. She was receiving a pension from her husband's, not from her work not covered by Social Security. And so the Social Security office took that and they docked her Social Security benefits. And next thing you know, she's writing me saying, why is my benefit so much smaller than what we estimated? We had to set an appointment with the Social Security office and go in, and she got it all straightened out. In the end, she got her full Social Security benefits because GPO did not apply to her, because she was not the one who had, worked and not paid into Social Security. Her husband got the pension, right? And so she was entitled in that case to the full survivor pension.
Yeah.
So kind of back to your question, if you're subject to WEP, right, you are likely also not going to receive a full survivor or spousal benefit.
So on the Social Security website, there's some stats around the characteristics of a GPO beneficiary. It says in 2020, GPO applied to about 11.5% of the 6.25 million spousal or widow beneficiaries, or about 716,000, and that the beneficiaries affected by GPO had an average monthly non-covered pension of $2,531, which was nearly $1,000 more than the average Social Security retired worker benefit of $1,544 in 2020, and that nearly three-quarters of the beneficiaries affected by GPO had the entire spousal or widower benefit offset and had an average monthly non-covered pension of $3,193, and those with partially offset benefits had an average non-covered pension of $930. So some big differences in cases of the offset.
Yeah, and the idea is that if you have a pension, you have cash flow coming in, and so you're not going to be double dipping. There's no need to provide you also the survivor benefit, because Social Security wasn't intended to, replace all of your income. It was intended to replace a base amount, even for widows or widowers. And so that's the rationale behind it. Although I know if you're subject to it, it may not feel fair.
So other characteristics, about 82% of those affected are women and 17% men. It's equally divided between widows and spousal benefits. 71% had the full offset and 29% had a partial offset. And that the average benefit before the offset was 915, and after the offset it was 186. So for maybe widows and spouses, the full offset also needs to be factored into a retirement income plan.
Yeah. So when we do a retirement income plan, we, often tell people, even in our videos, when we're talking about Social Security, we talk about how survivor benefits work and that you want to max out the highest earners Social Security benefit, because that becomes the survivor benefit for whoever is the longest to live. But in these cases, that may not be true, because if the surviving spouse was a teacher, for example, she has a pension from work not covered by Social Security. Her husband dies. She thinks she's going to get the full survivor Social Security benefit. Well, that wouldn't be the case, right? She would be subject to the government pension offset. And so if you had planned in your projection that at the husband's passing, that full Social Security benefit was now going to get applied to the spouse along with her full pension, that's simply not going to be the case.
So I know there have been efforts by some Congress men and women to sort of deal with what they think is a unfair problem, but it doesn't seem like there's any political motivation to do this. In part because it doesn't necessarily affect it doesn't affect so many people that it's a problem for enough to be addressed. Is it fair to say that this is a a, a, a policy that is unlikely to change for the folks affected?
I don't think it's likely to change. I mean, we can't get them to change the, big deals that do affect all of us, right? So I don't think it's likely to change. If there was anything, there is a note. If you look at your Social Security statement, it will have a paragraph on WEP and GPO. To me, the challenge is not necessarily the policy, but the fact that if you are subject to it, you're getting a Social Security statement that's estimating your future benefit, but not taking into account that reduction. And so it has to be your responsibility to go out and get that information and realize that what you're getting or what you're seeing on your statement may not be what you'll actually get. To me, that becomes the challenge. So for that 3% affected by WEP or 11% affected by GPO, right? They're not intentionally being misled, but it could be very misleading to get your Social Security statement and think that's what you're going to receive.
It's interesting, the statement does say it's an estimate. It doesn't include your Part B premiums coming out or your part, right, or your IRMA coming out, for instance. But are there some calculators where people can actually maybe go and look at whether I believe that the Social Security Administration has a website where there is a WEP calculator that people can use, or a GPO calculator?
There is, the socialsecurity.gov website is great. You can go, play around with some of the calculators there. We use a software package called Social Security Timing, where we can put in the amount of pension and, if they had, work, many years of work that was less than the substantial earnings. We actually put in the earnings history, so it calculates that for us. So if you're using some form of online calculator that allows you to put in your earnings history each year, and it will do the WEP calculations, I think Larry Kutlikoff's is it Maxify Social Security? I believe that's what it's called. I believe it will do those calculations also.
All right, Dan, we covered a lot of ground. I think we covered most, if not all of it. Anything we missed?
I don't think so. We have to be responsible. And so if you are a teacher in one of those 15 states, or a government worker, municipal worker, fireman, policeman, it pays to look into it further and make sure you do your homework before you calculate out what you think you'll have in retirement.